It's okay that we record this, right?
Yep,
Okay,
totally
great.
good.
Okay.
Alrighty, so I'm Maggie. I'm the Research and Program Associate at the Climate Museum, and I'm here with Nate. You can introduce yourself.
I'm Nate. I'm a public relations intern, and I started at the Climate Museum in May of last year.
Hi, Nate.
Oh.
Nice to meet you all.
Um, I I love this picture. This is a bunch of like friends and family of the Climate Museum wearing their Talk Climate masks. But we're spending today talking a little bit about why it's so important to talk about climate change, and also giving you a few simple tools you can use to start having climate conversations more regularly in your life. We'll also take a little bit of time here at the top of the presentation to give you just a brief overview of the Climate Museum, should you not be familiar with us and maybe be interested in some of the other programs that we run. So here on this next slide, we have our mission up here at the top. Our mission is to inspire action on the climate crisis with programming across the arts and sciences that deepens understanding, builds connections, and advances just solutions. And really what that means for us is trying to find ways that we can engage people who might otherwise feel left out of the climate movement, or who don't necessarily think of themselves as, what we would consider like the climate vanguard. They don't see themselves protesting in the street, but they care about the issue. And so we try to find ways to invite them into the movement and, give them pathways to take action that feels meaningful and that can really add up into being a force for good, for climate progress. A lot of our programming is really inspired by this statistic we have illustrated on the right. The Yale and George Mason program on climate communication releases this study a couple times every year. These are the most recent numbers. 70% of American adults are worried about the climate crisis, and only 6 of them report talking about it often. So our programming really aims at, that discrepancy, in that huge discrepancy, and trying to find ways to get those 64% of people who are worried about climate change but are silent and inactive on the issue involved in one way or another, calling their representative, joining a climate organization in their community, pushing for, composting at an organization they're part of, like all kinds of collective effort, and getting people to feel engaged and like they're ready to take action in those types of ways. So just out of curiosity, is that statistic surprising to anyone? Did anyone suspect that there were more people worried, less people worried, more people talking, less people talking?
My name is Arturo. I would have guessed that there were fewer people actually worried.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you say today that you consider yourself to be a part of the 6% talking about it often? Would you consider yourself talking about it often at this stage?
I would consider myself, I think, the 6%, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else here consider themselves in the 6% already, or are we going to bring you into the 6%, the growing 6% tonight?
Yeah, I would be in the 6% for sure.
Jen, were you going to say something?
I'll go after Tamara. I think she had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad when I look at that. It's really sad. Like, I just can't believe it. I wish it was like 50% at least. But yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I have not been in the 6% until very, very recently. Mm-hmm. I read Catherine Hayhoe's book about called Saving Us. Mm-hmm. And because I've been part of this group, actually, it's been motivating me to do some of my own personal research. So mm-hmm. Now I feel like I have more to talk about. So like just this weekend, I talked to a friend about what the city does for composting, and it felt really good to actually talk about it. So yeah,
there's immediate reward. There's like no need for external reward. There's like the immediate endorphin rush that comes from being like, oh wow, I've shared information with someone, and I'm not just having an inner monologue about my climate concerns. Alrighty, so a little bit more about the museum. We started doing public programming in 2017. This is our first exhibition. It was called Inhuman Time. And one of the things that we learned from this exhibition was just how much people really responded to having this opportunity to learn alongside strangers about the climate crisis and to sort of like feel the emotions that art related to the climate crisis can bring to the surface, in commune with other people. And so this was a really moving exhibition, and it was really validating to the fact that we were like, yes, a museum is the type of space we need in order to fight the climate crisis. After that, we did a art installation across the whole city in all 5 boroughs called Climate Signals with the artist Justin Bryce Garigula. And that had us going, meeting people where they're at in terms of geographically, like going into communities. We had a lot of the signs, these highway signs that were flashing climate messages translated into the languages that made the most sense for the different neighborhoods. And we had programs across the city at each of these signs. We had a mural painting in the Bronx. We had an Ask a Scientist Day across all of the highway sign sites. So we had climate scientists and climate experts come and just sit by the signs for the day and answer questions that people had as they, passed by and were like, I have a question. But one of the things we discovered in that Ask a Scientist Day was that people didn't have as many questions about the hard science. They felt like they were more questioning, like, what can I do? And that was really a pivot point for us as an institution, helping us realize that we want to be these catalysts for action and provide that space after you learn, after you feel, after you talk, get to see a presentation in a museum or an exhibition in a museum, giving you a pathway into taking, concrete action, which is what ended up happening with our 2019 exhibition called Taking Action. So this was on Governor's Island. We'll have a different exhibition there, I should say, this year, which you all are more than welcome to. It'll open in June. But back in 2019, we had this exhibition that was called Taking Action. It was staffed by 30 high school docents who would lead you around the museum, through the climate solutions that we have, the notion that we already have the tools that we need in order to cap warming, going a little bit into the political, financial, and social barriers to implementing those solutions. And then finally, in the last room, you can see in the lower right corner, giving people an opportunity to take action. So people would either pledge to talk to people, sign a petition, change their bank, join a climate organization, or call their representatives. So that was sort of a chance at the end of the exhibition to see, as you added your stickers for which actions you took to the wall, to see how many people before you had also taken action, still fighting against that feeling of being the only one who's worried about this issue. So that was that exhibition. And then obviously online, we've done a lot of online programming in the pandemic. If you're at all interested in things at the intersection of climate and inequality, I would encourage you to check out our series, Talking Climate, on YouTube. On the Climate Museum's YouTube page, you'll find all of these discussions recorded over the course of 2021 with experts. We had Rabbi Jenny Rosen, Mariana East Heglar, and a youth climate activist, I believe, and all talking about climate grief and about the sort of things that come along with climate anxiety and climate mental health last February. But we've also done talks on climate displacement, climate and law, climate and labor, climate and food. So those are fun resources online. And a lot of those events also start with a poetry reading. So I encourage checking those out. Oh, yeah, John?
Kind of a technical question. I gather from what you've just been saying that, the Climate Museum goes into a lot of these technical problems, and which is great, because it's also my observation that, at least here in New York, the problem most of the people I know have is that they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. They would like to be able to do something, And we in our little group that, you know, sponsor these first Friday of the month creation care night at Brooklyn Hope Church, you know, we had the idea of helping the city get universal composting going. And then I was amazed to realize that back in 2017, there was a plan to start creating biogas that would be able to run generators or go in the pipeline. And if people composted, they could actually turn it into energy.
Mhm.
And California just started, beginning to implement, a statewide program. And I was wondering if this had been something that people at the Climate Museum had any idea how one could help pursue a project like this, because if there were universal composting and it were actually becoming energy and helping in this kind of weird intermediate period where a lot of the fossil fuel companies are not pursuing new energy sources, and the price of energy is going up, it would be great to have the organic compost of a place like New York City actually not go into landfill, but be becoming useful energy for the city.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not that familiar with the strides being made across New York City on like a city level about that. But when I mentioned before that we have a house on Governor's Island, Earth Matter is also an organization based on Governor's Island that is like a huge hub of like knowledge and resources for composting. And they're a big, they compost everything on Governor's Island, and they might be a good resource. I can send you follow-up information about Earth Matter for thinking through the policy, like the route towards what's going on right now and the route towards
That's a great idea. I'm glad you mentioned that. I was there and saw them once several years ago, and I imagine they're much bigger and better now, and we're really good to start with and very much interested in composting.
Yeah, no, and I'll make a pitch probably 5 times in this presentation about visiting Governor's Island and coming to our exhibition, but you can really make a nice day of it, learning so much from Climate Museum, but also like the Billion Oyster Project and their whole project around using oysters to filter water and clean the East River. They're situated on Governor's Island. Earth Matter is there. There's the American Indian Community House there. There's just like amazing resources for learning at the intersection of like climate issues, social issues. It's a great day trip if your group ever goes on a field trip when it's a little bit warmer out.
No, thank you. That's a splendid idea.
The last thing I'll cover in this brief little history before we go back into the climate conversations is this exhibition we did. It was a one-day sculptural installation in Washington Square Park where the artist Gabriela Salazar, she deconstructed these casts she had made of the windows in her childhood home. And the piece was called Low Relief for High Water. And so she took apart these casts and then handed out pieces of the sculpture, pieces of her home to passersby over the course of the whole day. And it was a really beautiful exercise in having like a conversation about like home as a starting place for thinking about climate change, that, climate change isn't this issue that's only affecting polar bears, or people in far off places, that it's an issue that impacts your home as well, and starting to use home as a place to start the climate conversation. So that's a little bit about the background of the Climate Museum, and I'm going to pass it over to Nate now to know a little bit more about why, further the pitch as to why we're saying you have to talk about climate change more often.
Of course. Thank you, Maggie. So yes, having climate conversations is important for a lot of reasons. The perfect example I'll think of is that we both enjoy being here to show you like what it is that we do and how we can help you in having these conversations with other groups and your peers and your neighbors and your friends and whatnot. So by taking part in these conversations, it helps us move away from the fear, and it helps us move towards hope, rational optimism and action. And this is because by having these conversations, we understand the issues with more relevance to our local perspective. When we speak to those around us, it helps us build a sense of community through climate engagement. And by this, you can learn exactly like how is your block or how is your neighborhood affected? Is it power outages? Is it a lack of proper garbage disposal, etc.? It also empowers us all to speak up about the kind of future that we want to secure for a more just, safe life for all of us now and our future generations. By normalizing climate conversations, we build a certain level of confidence, such as like with anything that we continuously repeat. So the more conversations you have with more people, is the more versed you'll be to have conversations with newcomers who won't be as versed as you 1 month down the road or 2 months down the road.
So now we're asking you to just take a moment before we go further and write down 3 people who you don't typically talk to about climate change, who you plan to start engaging in these types of conversations with. Either pen and paper or a note on your phone or whatever makes the most sense. Now hold on to that paper, stay true to your resolution, but we're going to talk a little bit about how, climate conversations can start from anywhere. And there's, I think a pressure that people feel sometimes to be an expert in climate change in order to start a conversation. But these are just some examples of ways in which you can start having climate conversations, from a public health angle, from an equity angle, from an economic angle. You can talk about recent news. I think it's interesting that we're here talking about climate communications while you guys are in this big compost initiative. In college my first job was working composting for my university, and I had to go around and collect all the compost and pick out the red Solo cups from the compost bins around campus. And it was really the starting place because composting is something that people were doing in their kitchens, and it could feel like, what is this? What am I, why am I doing this? And it was really exciting for it to be able to be part of a larger dialogue about why composting mattered to me, which is because climate change is an issue I care about, and making those connections visible to people and helping people see how their individual choices as part of a larger collective movement was making change on our campus, and was helping divert tons of pounds of food from the landfill to these composting facilities. So that was my entree into climate conversations in many ways. But Nate, I think you were going to share yours as well.
Yes, so I was actually born and raised in Trinidad in the Caribbean, so it's a very nature-oriented country, but yet our economy is very heavily reliant on the energy industry via crude oil and gas and whatnot. So we have all of these big conglomerations like BP, BG, EOG that have head offices in Port of Spain. So I remember this one time when I was a teenager, I was driving along the west coast, and there were just thousands of dead fish just coming up to the shore, and it was the most horrific thing to see. And that was probably my first real conversation that I had with myself, which was oh, this shouldn't be normal. And then when I got to school, the next day we spoke about it. And then like we kind of came to the realization like, oh, that these companies that are set up in our city are like the companies that are kind of responsible for what's going on offshore, that's polluting the water around, or at least West Coast Trinidad. So that encouraged me to look up more into it and to pay more attention in science class to hopefully try to get a career in being part of the solution. So there's many ways to get involved in climate conversations. So not only just like animals or like wildlife, but also like a seasonal hobby. So like there's some things you can only do in winter, and if we have less and less winter every year, then a lot of people are affected, etc.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the news coverage about the Winter Olympics, like some of the climate stories that have come out of that, and just starting to, it's sort of like green colored glasses, like looking at things through a climate lens and thinking about how they're part of a larger story that you can share about the climate crisis impacting everyone and every part of life. So I wanted to share, these are just a few things that some other of our colleagues said about why they talk about climate. And I would encourage you on that same sheet of paper that you wrote down your pledge, not right now, but later maybe, to write down why you talk about climate, to sort of like think about like what's the motivation for you behind wanting to talk more about climate change. And I think this was an exciting day for all of us as employees of the Climate Museum to think about, for us, what was the motivating kernel inside of us that was powering the conversations we were having. I'll pass it back to you, Nate, to talk a little bit more about the climate ambassador cards, which I have not yet mailed you, Jen, but they're coming your way.
So at the museum, we have these climate ambassador cards, which are very great conversational starters on climate. If you ever bounce into someone who like wants to know, but they don't know what the perfect starting point is. So the information that we have on this 5-pronged credit card sized pamphlet, so it can fit in at the back of your phone or your wallet. Exactly, or you could print it out if you'd like to. And the research that we have on it is actually from Yale's Department of Climate Change Communication and George Mason University's Climate Change Communications program. Work with Dr. Edward Maybach. And the 5 points that is a great conversation starter is, it's real, that's what we need to agree on, experts agree, it's us, it's bad, and now is the time. And building off of all of these, you can see that it's real because most Americans know it's real, but not everyone is like willing to act on it just yet. By experts agree, you don't necessarily need to be one, but by understanding what the type of work it is they do and then finding ways to relay it to different demographics and different groups to see how it directly affects them is important, because it is us, because we can make our little changes, and we can also advocate for climate just actions by those in charge with strength in numbers. It is bad, and now is the time, because there's so many articles that we read that say we have until 2050, etc. But if we were to look at the news of the last 2 weeks, that's simply not the case. There's more information available on climatemuseum.org, which is where we have these cards, and you all are free to and welcome to download and print and have one in your wallet, or have a few to hand out. I have one in my wallet.
I have one in the cup holder of the car that I share with my siblings here, and it's nice every time someone gets in the car, they pick it up and they go, what is this? And it's a way to start the conversation. But I have about 20 of these, Jen, I can mail you, and I was thinking you could even put them in the church if people were interested in picking them up and taking them home.
Great, thank you. And I also like that you say right here next to "it's us," but there is no reason for guilt, which just helped my mind when I read that kind of shift into that means we have the power to stop too. So yeah, that's a nice touch.
We have another campaign that I'll briefly touch on later, but it's called Beyond Lies, and we have all these posters. I don't know if you can really see this, but we have one poster called Beyond Individual Blame, and it's really about, British Petroleum in 2004 coined the term carbon footprint, in the interest of shifting the blame from the corporations that were setting up society such that we could not make choices about where we were getting our fuel from. and onto these individuals. And like, there's nothing more paralyzing than feeling guilty about the fact that, I'm not perfect, so how can I be a climate advocate? And really trying to move past that idea that you have to be, zero waste in order to be like striving for a world with less food waste, and things like that.
I have a question about that. In that it does seem to be, I don't know, nearly common knowledge that the big fossil fuel corporations have for decades run a disinformation campaign and still are in many ways doing that. That's bad. And I would imagine that in terms of their decision making, one might want to assign some guilt.
I'm pretty sure the statistics that I've heard is that the majority of Americans are interested in holding the fossil fuel companies legally responsible for the damage caused by climate change. And there's some, I think next week, the House hearings or the congressional hearings where they're going to interview all of the CEOs of Exxon and have them talk about how long, I'm sure they'll lie, through their teeth, but bringing the issue more to light that these companies knowingly acted in the interests of their profits over the interests of society at large, and that there should be financial repercussions, and at the very least they shouldn't get to maybe sit at the climate policy bargaining table that they've ruined.
Well, I was just thinking that it's us, the middle one of the points that you shared here might need a parenthesis, allowing guilt to be assigned to corporate entities. I mean, there is some reason for guilt. It may be important to think about the profit motive here being creating dishonesty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that edit, and I also am so excited to be able to share. When I send along these climate ambassador cards, I'll send along some of these posters that are all about, Beyond Lies. They're all about spreading the word about fossil fuel disinformation and having you demand, call your congressional representatives and demand that they hold these corporations accountable on the behalf of the people who've been affected by their decisions.
What wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, it is important for them to feel guilty, and the weird thing with that is even if they do, they won't always be guaranteed to be held accountable. So we need to keep pushing for that accountability in numbers.
Yes.
Of course. So here are some.
Well said.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, John. Here are some more tips on how to have climate conversations. So it's important to know your audience, know the tone and the timing of the conversation. It's important to meet people where they are, understand where they're coming from, understand their perspective. You don't want to have two separate conversations, even though, because it's you can come at it from many angles. So if someone is complaining about, say, rising tides in their neighborhood, you don't need to deflect and speak about heat waves somewhere else. So it's always good to know who you're talking to and what it is they're experiencing and how they define climate change as relevant to them. And that way you can personalize how you react and personalize the type of the conversation, or personalize how you can encourage them to become involved to the particular issue. simplifying is also important because we have to be mindful of terminologies. So while a lot of us will go on to have like many of these conversations, not everyone you come across is going to be as versed as you are, understand the data, or have even been introduced to the same data that you have been. So it's always good to speak in a way that's like to paint the picture that you want them to see, if that makes sense. And don't be afraid to tell a story. Don't be afraid to relate. Like Maggie gave her story about composting and how that encouraged her to get involved with climate. I'm so sorry. And then for me, growing up in the Caribbean and seeing how the West Coast was being like destroyed and the marine life around it. So tell your stories and say how you got involved, because you never know like who you're going to encourage or inspire to do the same exact thing.
Okay, so we were going to take this moment now to go into breakout rooms and like practice, but we can also, depending on what works best for you, we can just, sort of check in and think about like how you might start conversations going forward, or how these ideas are, you're responding to these ideas about climate conversations and what you envision happening when you talk to those three people that you made that pledge earlier to talk to.
Yeah, excuse me. So this is Edward Paulino. I'm pastor of Brooklyn Hope Church. And I want to ask you, in your experience, have you seen or have you have any interaction with any other faith groups that have shown interest in, climate change or global warming? Or even just simple as caring for the environment?
Yeah, so we went to an event last year that was held by, I want to say the like Interfaith Council of New York or something like that, if that organization sounds familiar to you.
Yes,
and it was a whole,
yes.
Yes, they did a whole like multiple day long event around like climate change and stewardship, and they brought in so many speakers. It was really amazing to go to, and so that's one organization I know of. But the one we've worked with most closely is this group called Dayenu. Rabbi Dayenu, I think it's spelled Dayenu, and Rabbi Jenny Rosen from there started this organization. I don't know if there's a similar one for Christian groups, but basically it's taking this notion of like what you all are doing, where forming like a Dayenu group at your synagogue and having climate conversations be like a regular part of your like weekly options and opportunities at the synagogue. And I can't remember exactly what kinds of resources they provide, but it's like sort of a umbrella organization that then supports all of these local chapters of Dayenu groups, and does sort of calls to action and things like that. But they're based right here in New York as well, although they, I think, work internationally with Jewish groups all over. So those are some examples. The only other thing I'm familiar with, and this is from a friend who had one, was that there was briefly there was someone who was publishing Bibles that were everything that was related to stewardship was in green, and like sort of along those lines of like green colored glasses, or like, bringing a climate lens to everything. They like went through and they highlighted the text throughout the whole book that was related to climate or stewardship or environmentalism more generally. I remember seeing it now probably 7 years ago. So I don't know where you could get your hands on those, but those are the three things I'm familiar with. The Interfaith Council of New York's interests, Dayenu, and wherever you could find these green Bibles.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. If I think of anything else too, I'll send it along to Jen.
Thank you. I had no idea about the Green Bibles or those organizations. That's cool. Thanks for asking that question, Pastor.
Any other thoughts people have about, what are the obstacles you foresee that prevent you from having conversations with the people you've pledged to talk to?
I can say something, I guess. I mean, I've always been an environmentalist as a kid,
Mhm.
and my family, like, they're so, I don't know, they don't recycle or anything.
Mhm.
But I do think like art and music brings people together. I think that's an easy way to bring it, and even photos. Like, did you see this picture? I think it's an easy way to coast into it,
Mhm.
but it's very hard to talk about,
Mhm.
because they've, you know, I think part of them are deniers, so it's very hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, art and music, I think, is a good way of
Mhm.
bringing it in.
That reminds me, I think there was like a climate playlist I saw somewhere. If I find that, I'll also send it along to Jen. I'll make a note of that. I think that's like, sort of what we were saying earlier about the climate museum, like, art as like really the entry point, because it removes, it's like all about feeling rather than being about having to know everything. I think it's a really great way to break down the barrier to conversation.
I've started to start by asking questions. I think, one of the subjects that I've decided to get informed about and to talk with one another about is the composting, like I've mentioned before, because we all share that resource as a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone that I'm talking to that lives here, at least. So I start by asking, what was your experience with the city's composting before the pandemic? And, and sometimes I hear that, oh, well, we put it out and they never came by and picked it up, and I was just like, oh, okay, well, they've learned from their mistakes now. They're not just going about streets and picking it up. They want to be connected with each individual. That's why they're asking for signups and things. But yeah, I've been trying to get even more creative about just how to ask a question and see where it goes, so that people can feel like they're being listened to, and that and I'm actually listening and learning from it too. So
there's an amazing video. The list of things I'm going to send you is long now, but there's an amazing video from ACE, the Alliance for Climate Education. It's like a little stick figure animation drawing, but it's all about how like the first thing you should do in a climate conversation is listen, and it's very cute. A good resource to send around to people as well.
Sounds great. Thank you.
And that's basically all we have.
Yeah, it was so nice to meet with you all on a Friday night. I'm having climate conversations on Friday. This is a great start to the weekend, and I hope we go from here and we have some more, and then by Monday we'll have a lot more people who are ready to work during the week against climate. So of course, other ways to stay in contact with us is you can follow us on our social media. We're currently working on upcoming campaigns as well as current campaigns, such as Beyond Lies, which is what Maggie was discussing earlier about fossil fuel disinformation with that poster, and you can download those at beyondlies.org. Maggie also mentioned our Talking Climate series on YouTube, and those are really good episodes to get versed on topics such as law, labor, food, many things, and how they're affected by the crisis. And of course, we highly encourage you to join our newsletters. If you'd like to follow us on social media and DM us your email, I will personally add you to the newsletter myself. And I hope to hear from you guys in the future. And thank you again for having us.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you, Nate and Maggie,
for making this space for climate. We hope that you are the first of many religious groups that we visit around New York City. I think just like museum spaces are great spaces to have these conversations, I think religious organizations and religious spaces are great spaces too. So thank you.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Trying to get more churches to join us so we can be united and reminded that we're beyond our small immediate group of Christ followers. So yeah.
Well, awesome. And I'm going to send over probably on Monday, probably not tonight. I'll send over all those resources that we talked about earlier, and get your ambassador cards and the Beyond Lies posters in the mail. Over to you, Jen.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
Righty. Well, have wonderful evenings. Thank you so much. Unless anyone has more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
You as well.
That was great. I like that. Thanks for doing that, Jen. Setting it up.
Yeah, they made it easy. I just
Yeah, it was really
talked to her
nice.
once, and yeah.
That was cool. I couldn't believe that graph, but I mean, I kind of believe it, but people don't really talk about stuff in general. You know, it's hard to talk about anything. But that was cool. I like that, like just how to talk, like how to bring it up. That was great. Oh, let me stop the recording before it gets too long here. And